Imagine walking into your church this week. Maybe it felt familiar, comfortable, a sanctuary.
A place for rest.
Right. But now, picture this. What if that same space, that familiar place, is actually designed by God to be, well, less of a cozy living room and more like a launch pad?
A dynamic launch pad, yeah. Telling people and purpose out into the world.
Exactly. And that's the big idea we're really digging into today.
Yeah, we're exploring this powerful, maybe often misunderstood role of the local church in global missions. Specifically, how real worship fuels it all.
And how that same community, that church family, actually sustains the people who get sent out.
Right. It's not just about spending, it's about sustaining, too.
So we've gathered a bunch of sources on this, articles, research, looking at biblical patterns. You know the drill.
Yep.
And our mission here in this deep dive is to unpack what it really means for your local church to be God's main launch pad for missions driven by worship. How do we get beyond just sort of supporting missions financially?
To actively sending and crucially sustaining people in a way that reflects what these sources are saying.
That's it. We want to pull out the most important insights for you.
Okay, let's get into it. So the sources really zero in on this fundamental idea. The local church is meant to be way more than just, a building you go to on Sunday.
Or just a gathering place.
Exactly. It's intended as this dynamic launch pad for transformative missions that flow right out of worship.
And one of the big problems they point out is how often that role gets minimized, doesn't it?
Yeah, it gets reduced. Passive support, maybe handling some of the admin or the money.
Right, just logistics.
And this can be a real issue. One source puts it pretty starkly. Missionaries, they say, never parachuted in by accident. They came from a church. But if that sending church only sees itself as, like, a distant sponsor, well, the people out there can feel incredibly alone. Isolated.
Yeah, I can see that. And doesn't this tie into that idea of consumer Christianity, one of the sources mentioned?
It does, yeah. It's this mindset where people approach church almost like a service provider.
Like you're going shopping.
Kind of.
Yeah.
You show up, you expect a good service, good sermon, quality music. You consume it, and then you leave.
And the source called that model
Anemic and unbiblical. Pretty strong words. It turns the church potentially into a spiritual marketplace instead of what it's meant to be.
which is
A missional community. The contrast they draw is sharp. The church isn't supposed to be a cruise ship for the comfortable, but a warship for the commissioned, built for action, not just ease.
Okay, so that's the problem. Where does this sending church idea actually originate? The sources seem to ground it deep in the Bible.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They emphasize that God himself fundamentally is a sending God. It's his nature.
Like it's woven through the whole story.
Exactly. It's the pulse of the Bible, really. Think about it. God sends Adam and Eve out from the garden with a task. He sends Abraham.
To bless the nations.
Right. Sends Moses, sends the prophets. And then the ultimate example, Jesus. He's the definitive sent one. He even says, in John 20.21, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you.
So missions isn't just some New Testament program.
Not at all. It flows right from God's character and actions, right from Genesis. It's not an add-on, it's central.
And it's not just God sending individuals one by one, is it? It's about him forming a people, the church, to be his primary sending body.
Precisely. And the sources keep coming back to this key example, almost a blueprint. The church in Antioch in Acts chapter 13.
What happened there?
Well, what's striking is what they were doing when the big sending moment happened. They weren't in a strategy meeting. They weren't debating budgets.
So what were they doing?
They were together, worshiping and fasting, just focusing on God. And in that atmosphere of worship.
The Holy Spirit spoke.
Yeah. Crystal clear. Set apart for me, Barnabas and Saul, for the work. It came right out of their encounter with God.
So the call emerged from worship, not just human planning.
Exactly. And look at the church's response. It wasn't just, oh, okay, good idea. It was active. They laid hands on them, prayed, and set them out. It was worship-fueled obedience.
The source called the church the midwife of mission there, right? Not just a sponsor.
That's it. The place where the mission was birthed through worship.
Okay, another example they highlighted was Paul and the Philippians, that partnership.
Yes, Philippians 1 and 4 talk about their koinonia, partnership, fellowship, sharing. But the sources stress it's way more than just financial support, though that was part of it, definitely.
So what else did it include?
It was deep, mutual sharing.
Yeah.
It involved their prayers, sending one of their own people, Epaphroditus, to physically help Paul.
Oh, right, who got sick doing it?
Exactly. It shows the cost involved. And just generally sharing the burden of the gospel work together. It was deep relational investment.
That really pushes back against that image of the missionary as a lone wolf, doesn't it?
Completely. Or the church just being an ATM. The Philippians were like obedient legs of the same body, as one source puts it, drawing on Romans 10. Deeply connected.
So this paints a picture of the church as a whole. What did they call it? A gospel ecosystem.
Yeah, drawing on Ephesians 4. It's the environment where missionaries are identified, grown, trained, prayed for, funded.
And crucially, kept connected, right?
Yes, it's a launch pad that remains connected to the sent ones. It's not a fire and forget situation.
Okay, this feels like a really key connection point in the sources. If the church is the launch pad, God's the sender. What's the actual engine? What powers this?
Right. And the central argument is unambiguous. Worship. Worship isn't the opposite of mission or something separate from it. It's the source. It's the fuel.
That John Piper quote comes to mind. Missions exist because worship doesn't.
Exactly. The ultimate goal is worship spreading to all nations, like we see in Revelation 7. Missions is how we get there.
So practically speaking, how does worship fuel mission? What's the mechanism?
Well, the sources explain it like this. When the church truly gathers for corporate worship, it's not just singing songs. It's an act of beholding God's glory, seeing who he is.
And that changes things.
It's transformative. It aligns the church's heart with God's heart. His love for people, his compassion, his justice, his desire for all nations to know him. A church genuinely caught up in worshiping God. Well, it cannot help but become a sending church.
It just naturally overflows.
It's the inevitable result. Like we saw in Acts 13, that focused worship and fasting created the space for God to speak, to interrupt, to give that clarity to send.
And the critique is that we often get it backwards today.
Yeah, the sources suggest we often start with the strategy, the programs, the logistics,
Yeah.
hoping mission will somehow result, instead of starting with intentionally seeking God's presence in worship, trusting that will birth the strategy.
Any historical examples of this?
They point to the Moravians at Herrnhut. That community had a 247 prayer and worship meeting that went on for over 100 years. And it was out of that intense, sustained worship that the first modern Protestant missionaries were propelled. Worship fueled them, literally pushed them out.
So it makes sense that if you separate the two, if worship is just an internal feeling and missions is just an external program.
You run into problems. You get mission without fuel, running on empty, just human effort, where you get worship without purpose, just navel-gazing, disconnected from God's global heart. They're meant to be dynamically linked.
Okay, so back to that launchpad metaphor. The church ignites and releases mission. But it's more than just the starting point, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. The sources are really clear. It's the launch pad and it's the lifeline.
Lifeline. Explain that.
It's the birthplace, where missionaries are formed, discipled, tested, trained, commissioned. But once they're sent, that connection is vital. It becomes their ongoing support system, and they need way, way more than just money.
So sending isn't just saying goodbye. It's more like a covenant, the sources say.
Exactly. All long-term commitment. Because people on the field face incredible pressures. Isolation is huge, spiritual attack, burnout, cultural stress.
The church back home has to stay plugged in.
They must stay relationally connected. It's non-negotiable for healthy, sustainable mission.
Which brings us to a really practical point. The sources hammer home. How does a church actually do that? How do we move past just, writing checks?
Right. Because reducing it to just financial transactions is a big danger zone they identify.
Why is it so bad?
Well, they argue it dehumanizes the missionaries. They become just a line item. It stunts the church's own growth in understanding its global identity. It reduces this grand vision down to budgets. And ultimately, it undermines the sustainability of the work. People burn out without relational support.
Because it misses that whole koinonia thing again.
Exactly. It misses the biblical call for that deep, multidimensional partnership. Sharing life, purpose, burdens like Paul and the Philippians or Priscilla and Aquila working alongside Paul. It's meant to be rich and relational.
So what does that look like? The sources gave some practical pathways, right? Missional lifelines, they called them.
Yeah, 4 key ones. First, dedicated prayer teams.
Prayer as the frontline force.
Yes, not just an afterthought. Strategic, informed, consistent prayer. Things like specific prayer groups for missionaries, sharing real needs through profiles, maybe an adopt a missionary approach for small groups.
And integrating prayer for global work right into Sunday worship.
Definitely, making it central, not peripheral.
Yeah.
Paul begged for prayer. He saw it as people genuinely laboring alongside him.
Okay, lifeline number 2, intentional equipping.
This is about sending people who are prepared, not just passionate. Zeal is great, but it needs knowledge and skill.
So practical training.
Spiritual, theological, cross-cultural, practical skills. Churches should partner with good training agencies, offer workshops, provide mentoring from experienced missionaries, just like Jesus trained the disciples before sending them.
Makes sense. Third lifeline. Consistent financial stewardship, but framed differently.
Yeah, not as charity, but as gospel investment. It shows that mission is core to the church's identity. This means clear budget lines, encouraging regular giving, having emergency funds, and teaching people about joyful, purposeful stewardship.
Got it. And the fourth lifeline.
Regular communication channels. This is huge for combating isolation, building that bridge of belonging.
No, like beyond newsletters.
Oh, yeah. Regular video calls, sharing the real ups and downs, inviting missionaries to preach or share when they're back, encouraging personal notes, maybe even pastoral visits to the field, not to inspect, but purely to encourage and connect. That Hebrews verse about stirring one another up applies here too.
There was that great case study, that Church A in the Midwest.
Oh yeah, the family in North Africa. That really brought it home.
It wasn't just about money for them, was it?
Not at all. They own the partnership. Weekly prayer team focused just on them. The youth group learned about their specific context. They sent care packages, remembered birthdays.
And covered that surgery cost.
Right. Immediate practical care alongside the prayer and relationship.
And the result for the family.
They felt deeply connected, sustained, and were reportedly thriving after 8 years. That's the difference relational partnership makes. It's owning mission with soul, not just strategy.
Okay, so if we pull all this together, the ultimate aim seems to be about cultivating a whole missional culture in the church, shifting away from that consumer mindset.
Exactly. Recognizing that every believer is, in a very real sense, sent.
That consumer thing really is a challenge, isn't it? People showing up for comfort or inspiration rather than seeing themselves as part of a sent community.
It is, but the biblical picture is so clear. The church is God's main vehicle for mission, Acts 1:8. And every believer with the Holy Spirit is called and empowered to be a witness, a sent one, right where they are, John 20:21.
So it's a fundamental identity shift, not just going to church, but being the church sent from that base.
Right. Mission isn't just one department in the church. It needs to be in the church's DNA.
How do you cultivate that? What are the practical steps sources suggest?
Well, it starts with preaching and teaching. Consistently casting that vision, mission is for everyone, everywhere, work, neighborhood, family. It's holistic evangelism, mercy, justice. Use those Bible stories.
And hospitality, that came up too.
Biblical hospitality, yeah. More than just dinner parties, it's sharing life, opening your home, your schedule.
Yeah.
Romans 12:13. It creates natural bridges for the gospel. Like that example of a family just intentionally befriending neighbors from different backgrounds.
What about outreach itself?
Moving towards community-based evangelism. Less focus on big one-off events, more on building genuine long-term relationships. Prayer walks, serving the community together, patient engagement.
And small groups playing a role.
Huge role. They become hubs for actually practicing outreach, praying specifically for friends or colleagues who don't know Jesus, and encouraging each other in that everyday witness.
They're finally celebrating it.
Yes. You have to celebrate all things. Share stories and services, online, newsletters. Recognize when people are living missionally at work or school. Make it visible. Make it normal.
So the idea is when this culture takes root, it changes everything.
Pretty much. It shapes all the church's ministries. It starts impacting the surrounding community through this countercultural witness. And it empowers the whole congregation. Mission isn't just for the professionals overseas anymore. It democratizes mission.
That urban church example illustrated this.
Yeah, the one that really embraced this setness identity. People saw their jobs as mission fields. Neighborhood outreach became normal. Worship highlighted needs both far away and right next door. Families started hosting refugees.
And the church itself.
It grew not just bigger, but deeper, more alive, more courageous, making a real difference. It became what it was designed to be.
Wow. Okay, so we've really covered a lot of ground here from these sources.
We have.
We've looked at the church as God's intended launchpad, not just a meeting place. We've seen how genuine worship is the absolute essential fuel for mission.
And the need to move beyond just financial support to that deep relational partnership, those lifelines to sustain people.
Right, and ultimately cultivating that missional culture where every single person understands they are sent into their daily lives.
And the sources keep pushing back against that passive consumer approach, don't they? Calling people to move from being spectators to active participants. Commissioned. Sent.
It really boils down to this: worship that just stays inside the church walls. Well, that's not the full picture, is it?
No, but worship that overflows, that ignites mission, that sends people out. That's Antioch. That's the kingdom moving. That's the church alive.
So it leaves you, the listener, with a pretty direct question to mull over, doesn't it?
It does.
As you go about your week, ask yourself this: how is my everyday life, my job, my street, my family interactions, how is that an extension of my church's mission? How am I living out my identity as someone sent by God?